Hi, I'm Sarit Zahavi from the Alma Center. By the end of the month, the UN will renew UNIFIL mandate in Lebanon. This is a very special time of the year, August, because we are actually mentioning 16 years since the previous war between Israel and Hezbollah, 16 years to United Nations Security Council 1701 that actually expanded UNIFIL's mandate, and following that, here in Israel, we had the hopes that the area next to the border will be empty of any illegitimate weapon. Not only this didn't happen, but actually today, wherever we go along the borderline, we see Hezbollah. I am honored and excited to have with us Brigadier General Erez Maisel that will give us a briefing of UNIFIL, its mission, and its history. Erez, please come over.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Erez. I'll try and keep it brief to about 30 minutes. Basically, I'll give UNIFIL background and where did UNIFIL come from, and I'll move on to UNIFIL main issues regarding the IDF and how the relationship has evolved over the years, and I'll end off with UNIFIL looking to the future. The reason we're talking about UNIFIL today is that the annual extension of the mandate is coming up on the 31st of August. The reports already have been presented to the Secretary General, and I'm sure they'll probably be doing some staff work like every year. I'm sure the Force Commander, Head of Mission UNIFIL, is also in New York, or on his way to New York. So this is a very important moment to talk a little bit about UNIFIL, talk about the good and the bad, and unfortunately there's a bit of bad to talk about. This, as you can see on the slide over here, it's a very interesting slide because you can see that there are 4 blue barrels over here. Each of these barrels, by the way, this is what we call the blue line. This is the disengagement line between Israel and Lebanon, from the line that was marked by the United Nations in 2000. And that's basically the boundary between us and Lebanon since then. It's what's called the blue line. And on the blue line, where there are no Lebanese reservations regarding where the blue line is, or everybody should respect the blue line, these blue barrels. And basically the idea about the blue barrels was that there would be one barrel, from one barrel to the other, you have to see them in sight. And this is a remarkable picture because it shows that there are 4 barrels over here. Very clearly you can see all of them. And it's sort of over enthusiasm of 4 barrels. What this 4 barrels actually means and shows in one picture shows you just how inefficient actually the blue barrel marking is. Because you should have had only 1 barrel over here, and the next one should have been maybe a few kilometers away. You have 4 barrels over here, which clearly means that somebody had to fill this job in and his hours for that day, or had to use his cement. So you have 4 barrels here at the same place, which of course is totally ridiculous. So that's the first thing this picture brings to light. The other thing, of course, is that there are people over here. This is the Lebanese side, and this is the Israeli side. Below you can see a couple of examples of UNIFIL and the blue line, Lebanese Hezbollah, of course, and the blue line. Lebanese Hezbollah flags on blue barrels, so that's supposed to be UN property, and of course this whole question of UNIFIL deconflicting between LAF on this side. LAF is the Lebanese Armed Forces and the IDF. This is near the kibbutz Misgavam on the Lebanese side. So I'm going to move ahead. I'm going to give straight up, we have a window to reconfigure and rebalance UNIFIL. We've tried for years, everybody has tried for years to try and say, what's good about UNIFIL, what's bad about UNIFIL, and I'll get to that in a second, but just to give the bottom line up front, as they say, when you look at the shapers themselves, we see 3 main shapers that are basically impacting UNIFIL's environment and our border with Lebanon, or our boundary with Lebanon, called the blue line. First and foremost is that there is limited Western attention to what's happening in our area, unfortunately. Everybody else is somewhere else, terrible events happening in Europe, the war in Ukraine, and of course the Far East. The other, I would say, I'll speak about that quite a lot, is the impaired capabilities of UNIFIL themselves and the fact that they don't really have freedom of movement in South Lebanon. And every week there are more and more events where locals, organized or disorganized, basically meet the UNIFIL patrols and tell them you can't go here, don't go there. And that we're seeing more and more, then I'll get to that in a second. And above all of that is something that we're looking at for many months now, I would say since the conflict in Syria, but definitely in the last couple of months on our border, we've seen a growing aggressiveness of Lebanese Hezbollah on the blue line. And what we're really looking at is a growing Lebanese Hezbollah ground threat to Israel and to the Israeli settlements, Israeli communities on the Blue Line, on the boundary itself. In the next couple of months, we'll probably see another IDF defensive engineering effort to try and take care of that. So when you take these three things, nobody is really very interested, unfortunately, in our area, so there's very limited attention. There's a growing threat to our communities on the Israeli border with Lebanon. And UNIFIL basically can't really do the job because they're intimidated by the locals themselves for different reasons. So there's definitely a problem here. And the main lesson is, the main message is that what you need is more. You need a lot less. We need to scale down from what's called the saturation model, which we've had since 2006, which has put a lot of people into South Lebanon. And maybe they will do something over there. Unfortunately, these people it's like water, where they see a rock and call it Lebanese Hezbollah, they move around it, so nobody really sees anything happening at the moment. So if you come from the saturation moment to something less, and less is more, you reduce signature, you reduce, of course, risk and cost. And we suggest go to preventive presence, that is, push the reporting, make it routine, not once every couple of months, but even every day, so people understand what's happening over there, and of course, routine all-level engagement. When you look at who actually commands UNIFIL, and we need to say the people come with a lot of motivation, they want to do a good job. UNIFIL, of course, has stood up since 1978. The first commander was from Ghana. There have been two commanders from Ghana. And these are the commanders that have been here over the years. But in the last couple of years, it's basically European-led. Italy has the lead, 4 commanders from Italy. In fact, out of the last 4, 2 were from Italy. General Portolano and General Del Col. He was the previous one. He was just recently replaced by General Lazaro from Spain. And there was also a general from Ireland, General Berry, was commander for just over 2 years. When you look at this, you understand that basically UNIFIL, it's in many ways it's a European interest, even more so I would say than an American interest. America has other interests in Lebanon, but UNIFIL is not one of them. And when you think about where's UNIFIL going and how important is it to anybody else, it's definitely important to some European countries. When you talk about trying to rebalance or reconfigure UNIFIL, you need to think that you have to talk to these people. They need to understand, the Europeans, what's good and what's bad about UNIFIL. So this presentation is mainly for General Lazaro. Maybe you'll listen and you'll get some good ideas. And hopefully you'll be successful, because his success is ours and Lebanon's success. Next 2 slides are from the UNIFIL presentation on purpose. They work very hard. Let's be honest, they come from overseas, from different places all over the world, from all over, from the east, from the south, from the west, of course some of Europe, many from Africa and many from the Far East. And they come here and they work very, very hard, and as you know, it's very hot here. But also it's very cold. That's good maybe for the Indians when they're working on the Hermon area, because they maybe are used to it, but not for everyone. And so it's important to understand how UNIFIL see themselves. And so UNIFIL, when you look at the presentations they put out there, and they're very well thought out presentations and very professional presentations. You can see UNIFIL by numbers. We're talking about 11,100. As of today, we're talking less than 10,000 troops altogether, which is much less than it was in 2006, where they spoke about 15,000 plus minus. And they do work very, very hard. As you can see, there are 5 ships there. It's a massive military contingent of 5 ships, a military task force. They have helicopters, which they do routine reconnaissance and, of course, liaison. Do a lot of patrolling with the blue lines. And their budget is not small. It's 480 million plus, which is not small money when you talk about other things happening around the world, or maybe where some of this money could go. And civilian staff is also not small. Of course, some are local Lebanese, and many are also foreign from our area. They come to work here, and it's about 20-odd% female to male. When you talk about the capabilities themselves, you talk about land, air, and maritime execution. Unfortunately, that comes out too lame, but that's what they have. They have those 3 capabilities, so it's definitely a joint force. But they also have something very, very important. They have reached out to the civilian communities out there, civil assistance, which gives them that ability to impact communities, also gives them some leverage, of course, and of course creates some respect and trust. And basically, if you look at UNIFIL, it's a very impressive organization, very impressive. When you look at what are the tools that UNIFIL have, and these are very important tools, because I think that UNIFIL is important. It's just too big. But you look at cross-border blue line engagement. That is there on the Lebanese side, on the Israeli side. They can go all over the place, which allows them to, of course, to communicate and to do conflict. This is the building in Nakura where the meetings are held between the Israeli IDF officers and the Lebanese Armed Force officers. It's just on the Lebanese side, but it's inside a UNIFIL position. This is very important, this whole question of tripartite, meeting in the same room with the LAF once a month, normally once a month and a half, plus minus, to message, to talk, to understand. But there's also this communication between at different levels where Israeli Chief of Staff will meet with the force commander, head of mission, the new incoming will meet with the President of Lebanon. So this ability to engage at high level is very, very important. Talk about sustaining stability, messaging, and trying to prevent conflict. The other thing on the other side, of course, is that blue line contact itself, which I showed you that first picture. We know that it's like a human shield, basically. They stand in between the left on the one side, and behind the left, of course, is Lebanese Hezbollah, which you sometimes see them dressed in black and driving nondescript big black Suburbans. And on the other side, you have the Israelis, and that's a very good example of when we were working with the underground tunnels. You can see they're just how close. You have the Lebanese soldiers on the one side, Israeli soldier on the other side, and the UNIFIL's officer in between with the blue flag. On the other hand, you have other instances where the LAF will actually threaten Israeli forces. This is in Odessa in 2016, 2015, where they have an RPG pointed at us, and in this incident, by the way, an Israeli officer was killed, a lieutenant colonel. The liaison is important on both sides. So this is on the Lebanese side, this is on the Israeli side. And then UNIFIL also have a very, very important mission for them, and they call LAF their strategic partner, because in the long term, based on 425, which is the United Nations Security Council resolution, I'll get to in a second, they have a job, they have a mission, which is to basically train up LAF so they can take full responsibility for the border. So these are patrols that UNIFIL do with LAF, and as the years have gone by, UNIFIL are less and less independent to patrol. And this is a good example of an actual exercise, semi-amphibious exercise, but not only, they have gunnery and all sorts of exercises out there. The UN troops from different places all over the world train the LAF officers and soldiers to build capability. This is a very important slide, and it's a UN slide. It has three important things on it. First of all, the amount of troops invested in UNIFIL, and the change, of course, is after the 2006 conflict between us and Lebanese Hezbollah, which Lebanese Hezbollah started, initiated, and that's very much clear also to UN and to UNIFIL. With the numbers basically raised from just under 2,000 plus, jumped up to just nearly 15,000. And this is where we are, this is our area at the moment. We are basically bounded by Security Council Resolution 1701 from 2006. The other two pictures on the slide are also important because they say, first of all, the blue line. What is the blue line? Our side, the Lebanese side, and you have the boundary over there, just to be very, very careful, and to be very, very exact. And also, it's important also to respect the people. There's so many fatalities that have come from all over the world, and they've died here for this mission. They came here to bring peace, and it's a difficult job bringing peace sometimes. Even to prevent conflict is difficult. And currently, based on the United Nations site, we're talking about 324 fatalities from all over the world. And those who are interested can go in and see just how many countries have invested in this effort and paid a price. But the main message is that after 44 years of deployment in South Lebanon, UNIFIL is most definitely much bigger. But the question is it much better? And I'll say no. It's not much better. It's definitely much bigger, but it's basically is not doing the job it was sent here to do. Bit of history here. I'm going to go through it really, really quickly. This is more about us and UNIFIL. And it's important to understand that our relationship with UNIFIL is very, very long. It started in 78, but truthfully it starts in 1949. This picture was taken in the Nakura border post, Rosh Nikra. The building is still there. You can see the Israeli delegation, and these are in between, you can see from the UN. The first mission of the UN Peace Support Operation UNSA was in Israel. You can see over here the man with the bandage on his eye out there is the future Chief of Staff. So this is very important, and they signed this agreement. This basically said that UNSA would mediate between us and the Lebanese. They stood up something very, very important we have till today, which basically impacts the trilaterals between us and LAF. It's the Mixed Armistice Commission. And the border, there is no border, they called it basically the armistice deconfliction line or demarcation line, and that's the ADL, and that's what the Lebanese talk about today. It's not a border, it's a boundary. And this carried on for many years, up until the Six-Day War in 1967, when then the Lebanese joined the fray and also tried to strike Israel. They sent jets towards Ramat David. They were not very successful. But basically from 1967 onwards, even before that, Israel basically said it's not working. I'm not going to go into the legal mumbo-jumbo about that, but basically what it said was that the maps don't work anymore, and we have an issue with Lebanon, and basically it broke down. But the Lebanese still kept the UNSO monitors on their side. In 1972, we were talking 3 years before the Lebanese Civil War, the Lebanese requested that there would be UNSO monitors inside on the border with us, so they set up 5 posts. This is the sea, this is Nakura, this is the main base. There's Labuna, there's Khin, there's Ras, there's Maruna, and there's El Khiyam. Out of these 3 are still existing. Khiyam they closed, Maras is still there, Maruna, Ras, these 3 of them are still there, and they've been there since 1971-72. Why am I saying this? Because this whole question of UN monitors on the Israeli border at the request of the Lebanese government is nothing new. And the fact that the UN have always wanted to assist Lebanon in building capability or helping them with their sovereignty is nothing new. And that's why even today, based on the 1701 UN Security Council resolution, basically, Lebanon is a strategic partner, and in many ways Israel is considered to be the spoiler. In 1978, during the Lebanese Civil War, there was an operation, the Litani IDF operation, following Fatah attack on a bus near Tel Aviv. Terrible attack, and I'm not going to go into the details, but the end result was that Israel said enough is enough, and basically penetrated into southern Lebanon, went as far as the Litani. That's what's called the Litani operation, and the way out was that the UN intervened. The UN Security Council resolution was 425. The result was that the UNIFIL was established, and the base was at Nakura, where the monitors used to meet before. And it's very important to understand that 425 basically was at the request of the government of Lebanon, and the focus was making sure the Israelis or the IDF would leave southern Lebanon. That was the whole idea about this. When you looked at who actually voted and supported this and who chose not to, so 2 countries basically you could say were not supportive: Soviet Union, which doesn't exist anymore, and Czechoslovakia, which understood that they were part of, we could talk about the satellites of the Soviet Union. Everybody else was for it. You can see the countries that basically supported this, of course the permanent members, China and France, but many others as well. And some of these countries, like India for example, are very supportive also of UNIFIL and actually send troops for many, many years. The next issue was that Israel, after the 1982 war in Lebanon, what in Hebrew we call Sheleg, or the war in the war for Lebanon, or peace for Shlom HaGalil, peace for the Galilee. So there were troops of UNIFIL still in the south. This is a picture taken in Blat, Norwegian contingent. It's very cold, as you can see, and then those who are very good eyesight can actually see that this is all UN with their flag over here in Blat. You can't see, but that's Mal Jayun. Further south is the Israeli border, and over here there's an APC over here that belong to the South Lebanese Army that are basically local people protecting themselves, supported by the IDF, because from 1985 to 2000, the IDF supported the South Lebanese Army in South Lebanon against initially the Palestinians, and then after that different kinds of terrorist groups, mainly of course Hezbollah, which became the main enemy. But the big thing about this is to understand that even then it became clear that UNIFIL was sort of irrelevant. There were many clashes between them and South Lebanese Army, and they never recognized them as part of the Lebanese government. They called them de facto forces. There was problems of friction with the IDF as well, and because they lived inside Lebanon, basically, they were very much in tune with the Lebanese, and specifically first with Amal and later with Lebanese Hezbollah. So when you look at what happened, so even then there was an issue here with communication, because when the IDF pulled out of most of Lebanon, because the operation ended in Beirut, the IDF wanted to communicate with Lebanon, and the way to do it was to basically coordinate a meeting at Nakura with the Lebanese armed forces. And from November 1984 to January 1985, there were talks between the officers in Nakura. IDF on the one side, LEF on the other side, and UNIFIL basically facilitated this. This ended in nothing, and the IDF basically pulled back all the way to what we call the security zone until 2000. In 2000, the IDF pulled back, basically what we call the blue line, as I explained. In 2006, something big happened. In 2006, based on the United Nations documents as well, based on the 2006 1701 document, which basically says I want a much bigger UNIFIL, and what they said was a saturation model. They basically said from now on we will assist the LAF, they will come south. Again, the big thing was that IDF would disengage from South Lebanon, but more importantly, UNIFIL and the UN recognized that the actor who started 2006 was Lebanese Hezbollah. And so the quote is very, very important to take into account. On the first page of the Security Council resolution, the very important quote is that the people who actually started all of this were Lebanese Hezbollah by abducting the Israeli soldiers. And why is this so important? This picture, by the way, is from Alma, and this is the actual abduction itself. You can see over here the Israeli patrol vehicle, and these are Hezbollah operators moving towards this patrol vehicle. This is very important because it basically said that even after 2000, when there was 1701, the first group, the responsible group that actually broke 1701 was not Israel, it was Lebanese Hezbollah, and even that says so in the 1701 resolution of 2006. Next, unfortunately, and this is also important, this is now UNIFIL intimidated. If initially it started off as mediation, there were problems over there, and it went through monitoring, it went through, we're putting some people over there to make sure that the IDF would leave and make sure there'll be some sort of stability. It went through some sort of irrelevance out there, where it's basically friction, and they just tried to not bother anyone too much because it was very, very dangerous and force protection was important. They then moved to 2006 to expanded UNIFIL of 15,000 plus, as I said, 1701. So like a year later, somebody was not happy with UNIFIL in the south. Some people say that this was jihadi activists maybe, but a car bomb went off near El Khiyam, not far from the UNIFIL position, and 6 UNIFIL soldiers were killed, 3 from Colombia and 3 from Spanish contingent. Who runs it is basically the Spanback, and this basically deterred UNIFIL, in fact intimidated UNIFIL. You can say from this date on it becomes very, very clear that the mission in UNIFIL is very, very complicated, very, very risky, and how do we actually come in, do our job and go back home again without too much problems. And the saturation model, as you can see, moving from 1996 of 2,000 plus to 2006 of 15,000 to the current troop ceilings of about 10,000 plus, so that they can go up as much as 13,000. You can see that the saturation model, there are a lot of troops on the ground, people are working very, very hard, but honestly, it's not really impacting the blue line, and it's not impacting Lebanese Hezbollah, because when they choose to do something, they're able to do it. So just a couple of examples, and you can see it's color-coded. So this is in the Dov area, the Shaba, what they call Shaba. So as just after Israel had disengaged from Lebanon, we're talking about October 2000, so 3 IDF soldiers were killed. The idea was to abduct them, but they were killed. What is very important to you, and this picture shows it, is that it happened right next to a UNIFIL position from the Indian battalion. And they actually had pictures of the abduction, and it took over a year for the UN to actually authorize these pictures to be shown to the Israeli government, to the IDF, and to the families themselves of the IDF soldiers that were killed there. And this happened very, very quickly. You can see just over a year after just after a year after the war of 2000. Well, just after we just left Lebanon. The second case, and I mentioned it already, is the actual, this idea that they could abduct again, but this time you can see it's the red area, it's in this area over here. And this was the start of the Second Lebanese War. And again, I won't short of time, but you can actually see it's right next to Shtula over here, and I'm sure many people maybe had a chance to go and look at that place, but it's next to the town of Ait al-Shab, which is very, very important in Ramya, because they also have a connection to the underground attack tunnels that Lebanese Hezbollah dug a couple of years later. So it becomes very, very clear that these operations happen where the Lebanese Hezbollah have support from locals. The third event is the underground tunnels. This is just a picture of Metula. You can see it's from the orange. It's over here at this corner. These are different scales of the map, but you can see again. So this Lebanese Hezbollah attack tunnel, offensive tunnel, we're talking about end of 18, beginning of 19. Again, there is UNIFIL troops out there. There are patrols there. There's presence, but it doesn't really impact Lebanese Hezbollah freedom of movement or freedom of operations. And one of the latest events, or subsequently there have been others as well, is in 2019, in the beginning of the Israeli school year, where Lebanese Hezbollah chose to shoot anti-tank rockets. And these, by the way, come to this third issue I'll talk a little bit about, is Green Without Borders, which is this question of how Lebanese Hezbollah basically are returning to the blue line and re-establishing the tactical superiority on the Israeli boundary with us. So what does the slide really say after this long story about how did we get to UNIFIL and why is it so big? The bottom line is that the saturation model doesn't really help us. Doesn't help us, doesn't help the Lebanese. It helps Lebanese Hezbollah apparently. But UNIFIL is oversized, is intimidated, and basically is unable to prevent Lebanese Hezbollah activity. So you're paying a large amount of money, investing a lot of troops out there, but you're not bringing stability. But there are good stories as well. It's not all bad, because if you invest time in people and you respect them and you understand them, there are ways also to work with each other. And this is a good example of the underground tunnels. So again, this is again that area in Metula. You can see the cement pouring out of the tunnel, which was pushed from the Israeli side, which is this side. You can see the UNIFIL commander. He came and he saw himself. He sent troops to check that the tunnels actually were across blue line. And it's very, very important that the United Nations on the 19th of December 2018 recognized that this violation was Lebanese Hezbollah, or Lebanese, but they said it was difficult for them to say Lebanese Hezbollah, but it was clear it was from the Lebanese side, and probably was not the Lebanese armed forces. And this took a couple of weeks. It didn't happen in a day. They came, they had to check themselves and verify it, but at the end of the day, it's very, very important, sort of like in a matriculation report. The United Nations agreed there was a violation. This is the second big violation, because the first one, if you remember, was 2006 with the war itself. But obviously Lebanese Hezbollah didn't get the memo, and they continue with these violations and these intimidations, and of course this cross-border of the blue line, because the tunnels was a big issue, and of course that was not a small issue. I'm nearly wrapping up, but this is where I basically say it's not only us saying this. The UN are aware of this as well. We put in our report, which came out on March the 4th this year, modest advice to an incoming peacekeeper, UNIFIL force commander and head of mission from Spain, go slim. And maybe you haven't noticed, but I have an accent from South Africa, and slim in Afrikaans is smart. So it's not only go slim, which is reduce the risk, reduce the cost, become more effective, but also be smart about how you do your business. So without being too fanciful, modest advice, go slim. But I think they know that they have a problem. They know that at the UN headquarters. They definitely know it in Nakuru at the UNIFIL headquarters, because in their report from June of 2020, which is not so long ago, they understand that the big problem is they don't have access to the blue line anymore. And as those days go by, they have less and less access. So basically what's happening is Lebanese Hezbollah are pushing UNIFIL away from the blue line. If you remember, that was their mandate, that was their mission, that's why they're here, is to make sure the blue line is stable and nobody's doing any violent activities there. And they also say, and this is very important for the future, that the ability of UNIFIL to swiftly investigate such incidents, such as different kinds, the anti-tank, or the tunnels, or whatever, constitute a core part of its mandate and its efforts to prevent actions by the parties that could undermine the cessation of hostility. So basically what they're saying is, looking to the future, UNIFIL don't have a future. Because if nobody's stopping Lebanese Hezbollah from returning to the blue line, and UNIFIL is pushed further and further north, and even where they do move around, they have problems. So basically UNIFIL is there, but it's like they are flying at different levels. There's the UNIFIL level where there's no friction at all, it's lovely weather kind of thing. Although sometimes, unfortunately, things do happen, but there are accidents, there are mistakes. Now and again, they get a hard knock just to remind them where they need to be and where they should not be. But the actual events on the ground, lower down, is run by Lebanese Hezbollah, and they basically have freedom of movement, and that's becoming more and more an issue. This picture, I'm sure many people have seen. The picture is not so important. What it really shows you is that this is the Israeli side of the border, this is the Lebanese side of the border, this is the Agreement Without Borders, which we know it's tactical reconnaissance, or ISR for Lebanese Hezbollah, which means intelligence collection. What this picture, the picture at the bottom shows, is that when we started seeing this beginning 2015-16, they hid it. They were a little bit skittish. So they would put this, of course, this is the emblem of Agreement Without Borders, which we know is a front, it's a cover for Lebanese Hezbollah intelligence reconnaissance on the blue line. But they hit it with UNICEF and things like that, and you can, if those who can see, but there's a man over here, the camera and binoculars, they're very, 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 very careful about it. 7 years later, I'm not worried about anything. They bring these containers inside equipment and different kinds of capabilities they have out there. They put them on the border over here, as you can see, in front of Israel, in front of the Israeli settlement. You can see a settlement over here on the side. There's one over there. They put the flag up, of course, just to make sure that we all understand it's Agreement Without Borders. But the people inside are not planting trees. They're doing other things out there, and probably related to strike teams like Radwan and things like that, or different reconnaissance and intelligence collection. You can see this is just from the Washington Institute. We have similar, but you can just see how much this has grown from 5 that we saw in 2015 minus to what we're looking at now, 2020. And what's more important is that the UN actually understand that this is a problem. And this is a quote from there. This whole question that the government of Lebanon can't really allow them to go and check out these things. And I was here on Friday, now Sunday, and I stood on the Israeli side, of course, and I saw a Lebanese Hezbollah reconnaissance vehicle come up, and they, of course, can go into this, but then I saw a UNIFIL vehicle, because over here there's a UNIFIL position, and they, of course, came as far as there's a gate here. They had to go right, and they cannot go in, of course. And I'm sure if they had tried to go in, somebody would have made it very clear to them they cannot continue. So this is a very busy slide, but it basically says that there is a growing gap in mission contribution to Lebanon and the region from UNIFIL. You can say after 44 years, there is a growing discrepancy between what people thought in 1978 or in 2000 or in 2006 to what's happening on the ground. You can see the troop ceilings have risen. We're now about 10,000. You can see the different actors are not what it used to be in 78 to 2022. We're talking mainly about Iran and Lebanese Hezbollah, less Palestinians and Syrians today. We can see that the fire threat has definitely risen, and we see it all the time. Mainly, of course, Lebanese Hezbollah, but also there are others there as well. Authorized or non-authorized, but Lebanese Hezbollah more than likely authorized. And of course, we see in the last couple of years also this ground penetration threat via the tunnels. And most interesting, of course, is that Nasrallah is not even embarrassed about it. He boldly says, that's it. 1701, doesn't bother me at all. And as far as the government of Lebanon is concerned, they are basically helpless. So when you do a net assessment, in many ways, unfortunately, because of the way UNIFIL is working, it's enabling Lebanese Hezbollah and Palestinians that are basically situated in southern Lebanon, basically enabling their aggressiveness. Because when you look at UNIFIL freedom of movement, and this was in 2018 in Majd al-Zoun, and nobody knows who did it, but it's more than likely Lebanese Hezbollah activists, so freedom of movement is becoming a problem. When you look at UNIFIL blue line dominance, this is the vehicle that I told you about, that I took a picture of on Friday. It's interesting, he has no license plates, of course, but maybe it's something I missed. But he's very free to move around. when you look at IDF and Lebanese Armed Forces Blue Line coordination, it's okay, but it's not nice having an RPG pointed at you when you do coordination. I think that the facilitation and messaging is still something that works fairly well. This was done at Misgav, and it happens in other places as well. But unfortunately for us, Lebanese Hezbollah freedom of movement is definitely, for them it's green, for us it's really, really bad red. And regarding Lebanese Hezbollah capacity building, specifically regarding Lot 1, but others as well, definitely it's, for them it's green, of course. They might be happy about it, but for us it's definitely very, very bad and getting worse. So to wrap it up, I spoke about three main shapers. Unfortunately, we are not the big picture at the moment. Others are looking other. The money is going somewhere else, and the attention. When I mean money, I mean mainly resources, of course. There is a growing threat. We see it all the time. I haven't even mentioned the maritime negotiation aspect, but of course that's a big piece out there as well. Focus mainly on the Blue Line and UNIFIL, because that's their responsibility. Spoke a lot about UNIFIL, that basically they have impaired capability and they cannot do their mission. And the way I understand it, and I'm honestly put it on the table there, is that we should do less. We should do less, but we should do what we are doing. We should do much better, and we should do less with more. So scale down from the saturation model that was from 2006, reduce the signature and the risk, improve force protection, and focus on reporting that is pushed every day. When they see things, they report it, so that we can actually do something about it, that somebody is routinely handling this, not every month or every 4 months or every 6 months or something. And of course, routine all-level engagement. That's it, really. So thank you very much. It took me a little bit more than I thought, but it's just under about 40 minutes. So thank you very much. And any questions?
Yes, I have two questions actually around the tunnels issue. My first question is, did UNIFIL visit the openings of the tunnels in Lebanon, or if you like, was he witness in the incident in 2019 of the Cornet in Avivim? And my second question is that in your graph, you showed that with regard to the threat of the underground threat, it is raising up in 2022, the orange line. And so my question is, why do you believe it is raising up again?
So UNIFIL have not received permission to go and visit the sites, not the tunnel sites and not the anti-tank launch sites. That's exactly what the UNIFIL and UN headquarters in New York are very, very clear about. And it looks like they will not receive permission in the future. This whole question of ground penetration is, it's an assessment, of course. It's what I believe. It's because of two reasons. One, because UNIFIL, at the end of the day, are being pushed more and more away from the Blue Line, so Lebanese Hezbollah have more access to the Blue Line for jump-off positions. I'm not talking about underground, I'm talking about overground, talking about ground penetration. So there are more, if in the past they had to dig these tunnels because they wanted to hide the potential for surprise attack, but they also had to deal with the fact that UNIFIL was there. So they said, I'll dig the tunnels in a standoff. I can go inside a house, even if there is a UNIFIL patrol out there, I can freely move about. Definitely pre-conflict, but once there's conflict, UNIFIL are not there. They move somewhere else, but definitely talk about pre-conflict. Now they don't need to dig the tunnels anymore because they have free access up to the Blue Line and even just past the Blue Line sometimes, as we see now and again, because people are passing and checking that, just how secure that is. And the second thing is because there is a unit responsible for ground attack called Radwan. And we all know, those who have served in any organization, that if you have responsibility for something, you will develop a capability, not only because you think it's important, but because you have to say why I exist. You have to justify it. So yes, I think that this whole question of ground penetration will continue to be a growing threat. It has nothing to do in many ways with the fire attack, with the deep strike and things like that, but of course that continues as well, and it has very little to do even with precision strike. So if you take all these things together, the ground attack will become very, very important. And yes, I believe that Lebanese Hezbollah leadership in the south for sure believe that this is an important capability they need to have for the next conflict with Israel. And we have seen them doing their routine patrols and their orientation on the blue line. So I think they are investing because they think they may have to use it one day, not because they need to do it, because they believe they will use it. Okay, thank you very much.